what do you say to yourself a lot of the time is, I was really concerned about her getting dehydrated because it happened before, and then we had to bring her to the emergency room. So my wife and I just kept giving her more water.
Session, the Honorable Judge Hardy presiding.
Please be seated.
Calling case A-831-169, Christopher Wren versus AffinityLifestyles.com Inc.
Good morning.
Morning.
So you all heard about the hour or so we take about the depot testimony from yesterday, or not yesterday, right? So deposition clips were played that weren't recorded?
No, I didn't hear.
Yeah, we did, Your Honor. Filling it for real water. I spoke to Mr. Pepperman very briefly. The idea was to provide the transcripts that were played to the court recorder, both for the ones that were played on Friday and then going forward to make it very easy, so that way they don't have to retranscribe what's already been transcribed.
Yes, Your Honor, we stipulate that.
Okay, good. It's like I thought. Okay, so yes, so thank you. Anything else?
Nothing further, we're ready to proceed, Your Honor.
Oh, Your Honor, I apologize, I do have one quick clarification. Our first witness is going to be our expert, Dr. Najm. And at some point during his testimony, I'd like to have Dr. Najm stand up to be able to use the pointer on the PowerPoint presentation and the exhibit in front of the jury. I just want to make sure that that's okay with the court.
Yeah, thank you for asking this. And you can even though you know I'm going to say yes, if you want to, you can ask, in front of the jury, you can also ask the questions and get yes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything else?
Please be seated.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and thank you as always for your service and for your patience. We very much appreciate both. Our plaintiffs ready to proceed?
Oh, Your Honor, before we call Dr. Najm, one other thing happened, I forgot all about it. Getting on the elevator bay, Ms. Starr was very nice. She offered me to get on to the elevator before her. I offered for her to go ahead of me. She insisted, and then eventually I gave in and went. So I just wanted to let the court know that exchange happened.
Not
Nothing
a
else.
problem. No, thank you, Richard.
You're welcome, Your Honor.
Are you ready to call somebody?
We are, Your Honor. Mr. Pepperman is ready. We're going to call Dr. Najm to the stand. That'll be our first witness.
This way, sir. You would remain standing. Raise your right hand, face the clerk, to be sworn in, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please be seated. State and spell your first and last name for the record.
My name is Issam Najm.
And how do you spell it?
First name is I-S-S-A-M. Last name N-A-J-M.
Is your chair comfortable enough for you?
Thank you.
And is the mic working okay? Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Good morning, Dr. Najm.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good.
Can you please summarize your education and current employment for the jury?
Yes. I'm an environmental engineer. I study environmental engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I hold a master's and a PhD in environmental engineering from that university. I have been practicing environmental engineering with specific focus on drinking water quality and drinking water treatment for the last 34 years now. And I am also an adjunct associate professor at UCLA, where I teach environmental engineering classes as well.
Do you have experience studying the formation of hydrazine in water?
Yes, during my career, I conducted research on hydrazine formation in water, primarily focused on drinking water. And I conducted research projects that were funded by a national research foundation. It's called the Water Research Foundation, located in Denver. We conducted 2 projects that culminated in 2 research reports that were published.
Jane, can we please look at the next slide? These publications have been stipulated to admit into evidence as exhibits 338 and 339. Looking at exhibit 338, the 2006 study, could you tell the jury a little bit about what that study entailed?
Yes. In typical drinking water treatment, we use chlorine for disinfection, and ammonia is sometimes added as part of the optimization of the drinking water treatment systems. And so it is possible under some specific conditions for the 2 chemicals to form hydrazine. And so that project focused on researching under what conditions would hydrazine form when those 2 chemicals are combined in water.
And how about the 2011 study quantifying hydrazine in chlorinated water?
So based on the findings of the first study, then we were solicited to conduct the next study, which is really to go out and try to find if hydrazine is actually formed under some conditions, under typical drinking water conditions. And that's what the second project is about.
And what is hydrazine?
Hydrazine is a fairly simple chemical, but with very unique characteristics. It is simply made of 2 nitrogens and 4 hydrogens, not very complex. But it's what we refer to as an energetic chemical in the sense that it is used as a propellant. And in fact, it is still used to maneuver satellites and maneuver space stations. For that reason, it has been very much studied in the defense industry as a propellant. And it has been studied for more than 100 years. But basically, it is a propellant as an industrial chemical, but also it's a toxin.
So hydrazine is a toxic chemical?
Yes, it is.
Let's transition to what you were asked to do in this case. Can you please describe it to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury?
Sure. I was contacted by plaintiffs' attorneys to answer 3 fundamental questions after the discovery of hydrazine by the FDA and the analyses that they've done. The first one was that based on the information that's available to us, how could hydrazine have formed in real water? The second question was, could the concentration of hydrazine, is it stable or does it degrade over time? In other words, if you measure hydrazine now at this concentration, would you expect it to have been higher before or fairly the same? And then the third question was, based on that understanding of the chemistry of hydrazine, would you expect to have water in samples, have hydrazine in product water that is out in the market that people have purchased and had at their home? Would you still expect it to find it there after it's been produced and shipped and stored at the homes?
Dr. Najm, looking at the first question, how did you go about answering this question?
So what I was provided was documents from the real water operation, as well as testimonies and depositions. So I went through those and tried to understand first how it is that they generated this product. And based on my analysis of what I read from the staff testimonies and the reports and the documents, along with my knowledge of chemistry and specifically related to what hydrazine is, I constructed a model of how hydrazine may have formed through this process as they were generating the product water.
And Shane, if we could have the next slide. This is admitted exhibit 21 that the jury's seen before, but could you tell the jury what this document is?
May I go up and demonstrate on the screen?
Yes, Your Honor, we'd like Dr. Najm to be able to point out on the screen.
Sure, go ahead, thank you.
So I tried to draw a schematic of how, from start to finish, how the process works, how they made this product. And so this is basically a 4-step summary of the entire process. So in the first step, there's a tank that's, they put in about 300 gallons of basically filtered tap water, city water that gets cleaned and run through reverse osmosis and other processes to purify it, and then put it in this 300-gallon tank. There they add potassium chloride, this is a salt, and they added 44 milligrams per liter or part per million of this potassium chloride salt. And then they run the water through a pump through these, what they refer to as titanium tubes. And
Titanium tube.
those are the tubes, as I understand it, that was used to generate them. So they had 2 of them in parallel. I'm just showing one. But basically, the water goes in and goes into 2 ports in those tubes and comes out from the other side in 2 ports.
Dr. Najm, if I could interrupt you, if you want to grab the clicker, as you go through we broke down the steps for you and have some pictures that you can use to help describe this process.
Sorry. So this is an enlargement of it. This is the 300 tube. This is the purification system that was treated to filter the tap water. And these are some of the tanks at the site that were used to fill and draw from. So the water goes through, and it goes through these tubes, and they apply electric power to it, and the water comes out from 2 ports. One is a positively charged water, and one is a negatively charged water. So they apply this power to basically create a negative side and a positive side, and we'll talk about that a little later. The positive side, it goes to drain. That's not the one they want. They wanted the negative water. And that's the negative water here that comes out, goes into this tank. So this 300 gallons, half of it goes to drain, half of it goes to this tank. And then you take it from here again and run it a second time through the tubes. And so this water now that is, thank you, if you can advance them, I appreciate it. They apply it again, this is negative water, and they apply the charge again to it. And it creates a more negative charged water that they collect, and whatever positive charged water they generate from it goes to drain. So now we have what we refer to here as negative water. And so we start with 300, split it in 2, 150 is collected, 150 is split in 2, and now we have 75 gallons of negative water. And this was done about 1 to 2 times a year.
Dr. Najm, can I ask you a couple questions on these?
Yes.
Exhibit 299 is the picture. Those are the 2 300-gallon tanks that were used?
That is my understanding, yes.
And then exhibit 303 is a picture of the titanium tubes that we have in court today, correct?
Correct.
And so that water is pumped through those small titanium tubes.
Right. So inside there is 2 chambers, basically. The water goes in from these two and comes out from these two.
And Dr. Najm, pumping 300 gallons of water through these fairly narrow tubes, does that take a long time?
Yes, it is my understanding that it's several hours, if not a whole day to do it.
Thank you.
Okay, and so again, when you run it again, that's another pass at it. But ultimately, your aim is to generate a highly negative water that is referred to here as negative water. Okay, and this here is a picture of the power meter. And you can see cables here. It's very much like a battery system on a car. You apply power, and you have a positive side and negative side to the battery. In a car, the battery's positive side and negative side powers the car. In this case, this here applies that power to the tubes. And that's how it splits the water into the positive side and the negative side. Okay? So then this negative water is collected, and they would take 2.5 gallons of it and put it in another 300-gallon tank, with the rest being the filtered water. So now this is the negative water. You dilute it, 2.5 gallons to 300, roughly about 100 times. And what you create here is what is referred to as the concentrate. So this is the product, the concentrate product that they also sold. It's the E2 concentrate. And they also add these chemicals to this tank. It's a magnesium chloride salt, potassium bicarbonate, and this is a caustic chemical. It's potassium hydroxide. And that's the label of the chemical tank that was used to add this potassium hydroxide.
Dr. Najm, do they add anything to the filtered water before they run them through the tubes and apply the charge?
There's a treatment system in that package system that includes ozone, includes UV, includes reverse osmosis, and I understand it also includes activated charcoal, which is also part of the filtration process.
And do they add chemicals to the filtered water so that the water can hold a charge, so that they can split it between positive and negative?
It has been leading.
Sustained equilibrium.
Do they also add chemicals to the water prior to applying the charge?
As I mentioned earlier, there was a potassium chloride salt that is added at the beginning to the first batch of water and then goes through the tubes.
And why do they add that potassium chloride prior to putting it in the tubes?
This application of power on this tubes requires ions in the water to complete the circuit of electricity. So potassium chloride is a salt that is needed for this electrification to work. That's what the salt is for.
What are we looking at in exhibits 300 and 319?
These are standard safety equipment, so this is a mask that is used to prevent breathing fumes, gloves that are used to protect your hands. And these are basically needed for mostly when you're adding potassium hydroxide, which is a corrosive caustic chemical. So ultimately, this concentrate is then used to make the product water that is then sold. So again, 2 to 2.5 gallons of this concentrate are added to this tank, and again, purified water are added to it. And then they add more salts and more of the hydroxide to get to the pH that they have, a target pH of about 8 to 9 in this product water. And so they add 10 to 30 grams of potassium bicarbonate to make the product water that they then either put in bottles or put in containers to sell. So that's the whole process from start to finish. as I understand.
Is the E2 concentrate a common ingredient in all the real water that is produced?
It is the only ingredient. Everything else is water and salts. So it is what real water is really about, is that concentrate.
Let's get back to our first question. After reviewing the available materials and evidence, did you develop an opinion regarding where in the manufacturing process the hydrazine was formed?
Yes. After going through what we saw and understanding what is unique about this process, coupled with hydrazine chemistry, it is my conclusion that hydrazine formed in the titanium tubes during the electrolysis process.
Is your opinion stated to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty?
Yes.
Did you develop an opinion regarding how the hydrazine was formed in the E2 concentrate?
Yes, I did. And if I may also explain it on the screen.
Yes, please.
Okay, so inside these titanium tubes is very much the way what we call an electrolytic cell is, which is really it's almost like a lead acid battery. You have two chambers. One of them is a positive side, one of them is the negative side. And when you apply power to those two sides, so these are two metals. This is what we refer to as the cathode and this is the anode. But basically one positive and one negative. When you apply power, it pulls electron out of the positive side into the negative side. And so what happens here is there's a high concentration of electrons from the electricity that's applied. And because of that high concentration, chemical reactions from the ions that are in the water start to happen. And the same thing happens on the positive side. On the positive side, there's a very strong deficiency of electrons because this electric power system sucks the electrons out of this metal. So what happens is there are products here, specifically water, for example. Water can start reacting at the metal here and generate oxygen. Chloride, which is in those salts that were added, will start generating chlorine, the disinfectant chlorine. But this is what we refer to as the oxidation side. So this is the high potential, and this is the positive water side. This is the negative water side. And in between the two, there is a membrane that ions can go through in between here. And so on the negative side, I went through all the possibilities, and in my opinion, there are a couple of mechanisms that lead to the formation of hydrazine on the negative side, in this negative water side. To form hydrazine with nitrogen, you need a nitrogen source. The only nitrogen source available is the atmospheric nitrogen. There is nitrogen in the atmosphere, in the air. The air is 80% nitrogen. So nitrogen could be, quote unquote, reduced because of the high electron presence here to hydrazine. And this is the N2H4 here. It is also, there's also a second possibility of a mechanism, which is that nitrogen formed ammonia. And on this side, chlorine is being formed. So if chlorine migrates through this separation and reacts with the ammonia, it would form hydrazine as well. So from my understanding of how this is configured and the chemistry of hydrazine, those are really the two possible mechanisms that would have resulted in the formation of hydrazine. And one of them is a direct mechanism where nitrogen gas is immediately transformed to hydrazine, or the indirect one where nitrogen gas is converted to ammonia, and then ammonia with chlorine forming hydrazine. It could be the first one, could be the second one, could be both. That I don't know.
So is it possible that hydrazine is formed via either one of the two chemical reactions you just described.
Objection, we make.
Overruled.
Based on the chemistry of hydrazine and the chemistry of this, what we call the electrolytic cell, yes, it is possible, to my understanding.
And is it your opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that hydrazine was formed in the titanium tubes during the electrolysis process by either one or both of these chemical reactions you just described?
Same objection.
Overruled.
Yes, that is my opinion.
Thank you, Dr. Najm. Let's take a look at the FDA test results. This is another admitted exhibit that the jury has seen before. Dr. Najm, can you just describe what we're looking at here on the screen?
Yes, this is basically a blow-up from the FDA report where they reported finding hydrazine in the concentrate samples that they collected from the market after they began their investigation.
The concentration of hydrazine was determined to be 1.33 milligrams per milliliter. Is that correct?
In one of the three samples, yes.
In this sample?
In this sample.
Is that a significant concentration?
In the drinking water investigations that I was involved in, the hydrogen concentrations that we were working in were 1,000 to 10,000 times lower. So these are surprisingly very high concentrations.
Shane, can we please look at the next slide? What are we looking at on the screen here in Exhibit 5, Dr. Najm?
This is also blow-up of the FDA report on the two other samples of E2 concentrate that were reported. And one of them is showing 1.44, and the other one is showing 1.75 milligram per milliliter of hydrazine.
What is the date of these test results?
It's noted as October 20, 2021.
Would this have been months after the concentrate samples were originally produced?
It is my understanding that the bulk of the products that were part of the investigations actually were generated in maybe the summer or fall of 2020.
So that brings us to question number 2. Do you have an opinion regarding whether the hydrazine measured by the FDA would have been likely higher at the time of production?
Yes, hydrazine in and of itself in water is not a very stable chemical. In other words, it degrades over time. Now, we don't exactly know how fast it degrades in this water. The degradation, the loss of hydrazine in water is a function of a lot of things related to the pH of the water, the temperature, and the concentrations of hydrazine and other chemicals. So all I can say is that I would have expected it, several months before to be significantly higher than it was when they measured it from the samples they collected. How much higher, I don't know.
Let's go to question number 3. Shane, next slide, please. Did you develop an opinion regarding question number 3? Yes.
So, very much like I mentioned on the second question, hydrazine is not a stable chemical. So if the concentrate was put in the product and the product was shipped out and people stored it and used it, by the time you use it, it may have some hydrazine in it, it may have no hydrazine in it, because it degrades over time. It really depends on when you drink it relative to its production time. But it certainly would not be a good way of knowing how much hydrazine was in the product water by taking a bottle several months or years later and trying to measure it there. I would expect that to be quite a bit lower than what it was at the time of production.
Shane, can we please go to the next slide? Dr. Najm, could you please tell the jury what we're looking at here in Exhibit 7?
Yes. As I understand it, a sample of the product was sent in 2023, to a laboratory to analyze the product for hydrazine. So a sample of a bottle was opened and sent to the lab to analyze for hydrazine. And the lab reported back how much hydrazine they found in that water. And that was 2023, so that's 3 years after production.
On this exhibit, we see 7 different samples. Is that how many different samples of real water were tested?
That is my understanding.
And were these samples samples of the E2 concentrate or samples of the finished product?
It is my understanding that this is the finished product.
And were these retail bottles that were tested?
That is my understanding.
Shane, if we could blow up sample number 6. This sample, the date of March 1st, 2021, what does that indicate?
I suspect that is the date when this sample was collected off the shelf and stored away.
And what about the date received? What does that indicate?
That is the date when the lab received that sample to analyze.
So more than 2 years later, this sample of retail real water was tested by other things, right?
That is correct.
Could you explain to the jury what the test result indicates?
Well, the result on there is noted, that is 300 micrograms per liter of hydrazine is what the lab measured in the bottle that was sent to them to analyze. So that's 0.3 milligrams per liter or 300 micrograms per liter.
Does the fact that they detected hydrazine in the retail real water more than 2 years after it was collected surprise you?
It surprised me a lot. For hydrazine to have, and I understand that these bottles were not refrigerated, so they were not preserved in any manner. So for them to find that much hydrazine 2 years later was a big surprise to me.
Under the analyte, it says hydrazine DL. What does the DL indicate?
When you send a sample to a laboratory, the laboratory runs what they call a calibration curve. And they have to say, you know, we injected 10 micrograms per liter, we got this peak. And the instrument, we injected 50, this much, 100, this much. So a laboratory sets what they expect the concentration of the chemical to be when they receive the sample. DL means dilution. That means the concentration of 300 was above what the lab had planned for the range of what this concentration might be. And so they had to take the sample then and dilute it to bring it down to the level that is within the range of what their instrument was set at. And that's what that DL was.
Thank you, Dr. Fletcher. A couple final questions. Does hydrazine have a smell?
At a high enough concentration, Yes, hydrazine is a nitrogen-based chemicals, and that's where you start smelling possibly an ammonia smell or a fishy smell, because that's what proteins are made of, nitrogen. So at high concentrations, they have that odor to them, yes.
What about an appearance? Can you see it?
You can't see it when it's dissolved in the water, but again, at high enough concentration, it may start to separate and you may start seeing some oily sheen on the water, but that's as far as you can see.
Thank you very much, Dr. Najm. Those are the questions I have for you.
Let me cross.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
Give me one moment, I want to get set up. I'm working off multiple pieces of paper here. I feel like a little out of sorts, but, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Matt Kaufmann. I'm one of the attorneys in Real Water. We may ask you some questions today, Dr. Najm. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
And I'm gonna do my best to try and make sure we're talking about the same thing, because as we kind of were joking about in the hallway, engineers, attorneys, we always speak the same language, correct? And you are an environmental engineer, sir, correct?
That is correct.
Do you have any chemistry degrees?
I do not.
I'm sure you've still forgotten more chemistry than I'll ever know. Now, I know you have experience working with hydrazine. Have you done any consulting? You've also done consulting for the food and beverage industry, correct?
I have, yes, 20 years ago, I provided consulting services to Coca-Cola and Pepsi.
And did any of that consulting work have to do with hydrazine at all?
No.
Okay. Earlier in your testimony today, you mentioned that your research and work focuses on drinking water. And I'm not sure if there's a distinction, but do you distinguish between like municipal drinking water and bottled water here, or do you do both?
No, the chemistry is the same between both.
Okay. But does your work focus on municipal or bottled water, or is it a mix?
Our work focused on the chemistry of hydrazine formation, which was done in municipal water applications.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to let me ask you a better question. Never mind. Okay. So, you mentioned that hydrazine can look like an oily sheen on water, is that correct?
That is my understanding, yes.
And so, do you know what concentration that would be?
I do not know.
And what it look like, would it just be like a puddle, like a bit of oil in a puddle you see after rain, something like that?
I don't believe so, no.
What do you believe it would look like?
A sheen is a very thin coverage of a layer of water.
Okay, would you be able to distinguish between the layer of hydrazine and the layer of water looking at it?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, and would that depend on the concentration?
It should.
Sure. Okay. And the same thing, you also mentioned that hydrazine has an ammonia or fishy smell, correct?
Correct.
And again, once again, that involves at a certain concentration, right?
Correct.
And do you know what concentration that is?
I do not know.
Would hydrazine smell like gasoline?
It should not.
Okay. Would it be red?
I'm sorry?
Would it be red at any time?
It should not.
Okay. Would it form mold? Would it result in formation of mold in a bottle of water?
It's possible, I don't know.
Okay. Let me ask you this. You talked about the testing, FDA testing of the concentrate bottles. And one of the things you mentioned was that oxygen is involved in the degradation of hydrogen, correct?
That is one of the factors, yes.
Would being in a sealed container slow the degradation of hydrogen?
It would slow the effect of oxygen.
Okay. And if it's in a sealed container, eventually would it use up all the oxygen in that sealed container?
It would use up the oxygen in the sealed container, but as I said, oxygen is one factor. Hydrazine auto-decomposes as well. In other words, it degrades as a chemical in the absence of any other factors around it.
Okay, fair enough, I'm just trying to get some clarification as to what you testified to. As I stated before, I am not an engineer. And I want to make sure the jury is also understanding your testimony as well. Did you personally inspect any of the equipment at Real Water?
No, I did not.
Were you provided any of the equipment to inspect in your lab?
No, we were not.
Okay. Did you, aside from reviewing the depositions of Real Water employees, did you talk to any of the employees from Real Water?
No.
Okay. Now, you mentioned two hypotheses are for the possible pathways of formation, right?
Correct.
Okay. I know this is very basic for you, but can you tell us what a hypothesis is?
Hypothesis is the world of science is to look at multiple observations, analyze those observations, blend them with your technical knowledge, and coming up with the most plausible explanation of how something happened.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, if I understand you correctly, your hypothesis one is that the nitrogen from the room air became soluble in the water, and then during the electrolysis process, formed hydrogen. And I know this probably gross oversimplification, but is that the basics of it?
That is the first step required for those pathways to proceed.
And that would be if the nitrogen found in the hydrazine was from the room air, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And your second hypothesis involves reaction between ammonia and chlorine, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, are you aware of chlorine being found in any real water samples?
The only reference for chlorine that was part of the observation that led me to that second hypothesis is during either deposition or testimony of one of the employees, I don't remember his name, talking about as he was, maybe the owner or the founder was experimenting with it, and he could clearly smell chlorine if you applied too much power, so he'd back out on power. So that's where the reference for chlorine came in.
And does the name John Marlowe refresh your recollection at all with that statement?
Yes.
Okay. And do you remember who Mr. Marlowe was?
As I understand it, he is the inventor of this process.
Okay. And do you know when he was speaking about his experiments and smell of chlorine, was that when he was actually conducting experiments or after he had settled on the process already?
I believe when he was conducting experiments.
Okay. Are you aware of any evidence of chlorine being generated? Strike that. Let me ask you a better question, Doctor. Are you aware of any testimony from anyone who produced the concentrate of, other than John Marlowe, of chlorine being formed?
I'm not aware of anyone looking for chlorine.
Okay. Now, given your two hypotheses, can you tell us how much hydrogen was created by the electrolysis process?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Would you clarify, please?
Sure. Let me ask it a different way then. Can you give an estimate as to the rate of production of hydrogen from the electrolysis process?
I cannot.
Okay. Now, real water only added salts to the concentrate, correct? Thank you.
Real water added salts, added caustic, and added electrical power.
Okay. So let me ask you a different question. Did any of the salts or when you say caustic, you're referring to potassium hydroxide, correct?
Correct.
Okay. between the salts and the potassium hydroxide, did any of those chemicals contain nitrogen and in its atomic structure?
No,
Now, the KOA, I'm sorry, here I am using abbreviation. Potassium chloride or hydroxide, when that is dissolved in water, does it stay caustic?
it is what raises the pH of the water, so it makes the water more and more caustic.
Okay, and by caustic, you mean alkaline, is that fair?
By caustic, I mean higher pH than neutral.
The pH that the potassium hydroxide raises the real water to, is that dangerous to drink?
The pH of the product water was 8 to 9, which is not dangerous to drink.
Okay. In your report, you cited 3 articles. Two of them were your articles that Eric took you through, correct?
Yes,
And those were both produced by the Water Research Foundation?
correct.
Is that a journal or just a foundation?
It is a foundation that funds research projects and appoints project advisory committees to oversee each project before it's produced.
Okay. Is that a peer-reviewed journal article then?
No, it's not.
Okay. The other book you cited was, what's his name? I'm sorry. Dr. Schmidt, I believe?
Correct,
And that's from 2001, correct?
correct.
Is there anything in Dr. Schmidt's book about hydrazine being formed out of airborne nitrogen?
Not that I recall.
Is there anything in Dr. Schmidt's book about hydrazine being formed using your second technique?
Yes,
Now, the lab analysis, the FDA concentrations we saw, that was done with a non-targeted GCMS, correct?
that is my understanding, yes.
Do you know if the FDA ran any other tests on real water products prior to or after that finding?
I don't know.
Did you review any other tests done by the FDA on real water products?
I reviewed the FDA reports that were generated as part of this investigation. And there were a number of things that were analyzed in there, I just don't recall what they are.
Understandable. Did any of the other tests test for hydrogen? Do you recall?
Not that I recall.
Okay. Were there any findings out of the norm in any of the other tests you recall?
Objection vague.
Overruled.
Not that I recall.
Have you ever recommended a bottle of water? Strictly, let me ask you a better question. Have you ever recommended that any of your clients routinely test for hydrogen in the past?
No, I have not.
Have you ever seen hydrogen found in bottled water before?
I have not looked for it.
But do you keep up on the scientific literature on hydrogen, sir?
There's a lot of literature out there. If I say yes, I'd be exaggerating. So I follow. The most important thing here is that this is not a typical bottled water production. This is about the electrolysis of water. That process is why I'm here. It's not the making of a bottled water. That is a different issue than what we have here.
Okay, so it's fair to say you are not familiar with the federal regulations for bottled water manufacturers then?
I am somewhat familiar with them, yes.
Do they require the bottled water manufacturers to test for hydrogen?
No.
Thank you, sir. Doctor, that's all I have today.
Any reader?
No, Your Honor, nothing further. Thank you.
Any questions from any jurors? thank you, Doc. Council could come up
Can I
with,
ask a question?
oh, there, have a seat. You have to write it down.
Put your number on the top.
You could come on up, Walt. Okay, so we do have a question from one of our jurors, Doctor. So the question is, can you describe caustic?
Wow. You know what an acid is? You know, an acid is a chemical that is, when you take a chemical, the acidity and causticity of water is driven by one component of water, which is the hydrogen ion. If you have a lot of hydrogen ions in water, that makes the water acidic. And that drops the pH that you measure when you measure the pH of a water. So typical water can have a pH that you drink from 6.5 to maybe 9. But when you go to very acidic water, that means you're dropping the pH further lower and lower and lower. You start to make very concentrated acid, which literally burns your skin. So when using chemicals for treatment, you buy a very concentrated chemical and you dose it in small quantities to the water to raise the pH up or down. Caustic is exactly the flip side of what an acid is. It is a chemical that got so concentrated that the pH could be 12, 13, 14. And that water gives you a very slippery feel on your skin because it is literally dissolving any protective layers on top of your skin. So these two sides are chemicals that are used to manipulate the pH of water. You use acid to drop the pH, you use caustic chemical to raise the pH. And both of them are hazardous and toxic as pure chemicals. So when you're handling them, they have to be handled very carefully.
Thank you. Any follow-up from plaintiffs?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. That was an excellent question, and you know it's an excellent question when the expert says, wow, in response to it. Just to follow up on what you were describing, we looked at a couple exhibits, there are pictures, exhibit 300 and 319 of the gas mask and the elbow-length rubber gloves. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
These chemicals, including the caustic chemicals that were added to real water, are the working with those chemicals, the reasons why safety equipment such as gas masks and gloves were part of the manufacturing process that you reviewed.
Objection, vague speculation.
You could rephrase.
What were the purpose of the gas masks and gloves that were used as part of the real water manufacturing process?
Objection, speculation.
Any response to the objection?
He reviewed the entire manufacturing process. We have exhibits admitted that gas masks and gloves were used. It was in the testimony.
Overruled.
Any facility that's going to be storing and using, whether acid or caustic, needs to have protective equipment when you're adding those chemicals to the water as part of the production process. Because as I mentioned, if you splash that on your hands or God forbid your face or eyes, it's very dangerous. So you've got to have these protective wear when handling those concentrated chemicals.
Is it possible when using those chemicals, as real water was, that there be fumes or a gas that's emitted?
Objection, or speculation.
Overruled.
Caustic Again, because, even though it's liquid, if you're close enough to it, you'll smell the fumes of it coming with the standard mist that you get out of a water solution. So you gotta protect yourself from that as well, because again, especially the eyes, going into the eyes would be a big problem.
Thank you, Dr. Najm. Appreciate it.
Any follow-up on that?
Just a couple, Your Honor.
Sure.
All right, Dr. Najm, just a couple of quick questions. You mentioned that any facility using a caustic chemical like potassium hydroxide should be using personal protective equipment to use field equipment. Is that correct?
Those handling those chemicals should wear protective equipment, yes.
Okay. Now, so is there anything wrong with if you have the chemicals present, you should have the protective equipment, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, once you add, you mentioned a couple of times in the last few minutes about how using caustic chemicals in their pure form is very dangerous, and I agree with you. But once you dilute that caustic chemical, does it become less dangerous?
The product that received that chemical and is in the normal pH range is not dangerous.
All right, that's all I wanted to know. Thank you, Don.
Any other questions?
Nothing further.
Any other questions? Sure. Come on. Okay, so another question from a juror. So could repeated use of the same titanium tubes be a factor in the formation of hydrazine, or can it form with fresh, titanium tubes?
I believe the more power you apply and you generate more and more negative water, you form more and more hydrazine. So I would expect that some hydrazine may have formed in the first pass and another more hydrazine formed in the second pass. As to whether an old or a new tube, these reactions happen on the surface of the metal. So if the surface of the metal does get dirty and separates the water from the metal, the reaction is not as efficient. That's the only thing I can think of where age matters. But other than that, if the surface of the metal is the same between repeated applications of that power, I would expect hydrazine to keep forming under those mechanisms.
Any follow-up?
No, Your Honor.
Any follow-up?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Thank you, Doc.
Is there time you take Dr. Najm?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have our lunch break. Come back at, let's make it 1:30. So during this recess, you're admonished not to talk or converse amongst yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this trial. Do not read, watch, or listen to any report of or commentary on the trial or any person connected with this trial by any medium of information, including without limitation to social media, text, newspapers, television, internet, radio. Do not visit the scene of any events mentioned during the trial. Do not undertake any investigation. Do not do any posted communications on any social networking sites. Do not do any independent research, including internet searches. Do not form or express any opinion on any subject connected with the trial until the case is finally submitted to you. See you back at 1:30.
Please rise for the jury.
Let's go off. Okay. We're also getting off.
Actually, it was something we was wanted to do outside the presence, Your Honor, I misspoke, sorry about that.
Okay.
But it's very quick, you go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you, Joel, go back to the water defendants. We have, up next, I believe, one of the carrier plaintiffs, as the court will recall, there was a motion for summary judgment and a motion to strike the untimely expert report of Dr. Sands. The court had denied the motion to strike and denied the motion for summary judgment. We just want to renew our objection. The $105,000 counseling fee that Dr. Sands has recommended for the carrier plaintiffs and some other plaintiffs came after the disclosure of expert testimony, after the time to do so. It was untimely, we objected to it, and we want to make sure we preserve the record.
Thank you. Any response from plaintiffs?
Just a reference to the underlying record when we opposed the motion that Mr. Odou just referenced.
I missed. Say that again.
Just, I'm just going to reference the opposition brief and argument.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so I'll stick with my order, but the objection to the statement of the order denied the motion straight. Okay, anything else?
No, Your Honor, we're ready to proceed.
Are plaintiffs ready to proceed?
We are, Your Honor.
Okay.
I'd like to call Ryan Carrier to the stand.
Step this way, Mr. Chairman. Remain standing, raise your right hand, face the clerk, please sworn in, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Please be seated, state and spell your first and last name for the record.
My name's Ryan, R-Y-A-N, last name's Carrier, C-A-R-R-I-E-R.
Good afternoon, Mr. Carrier. Would you please tell the jury where you're originally from?
My name's Ryan Carrier. My daughter's hair carrier. I'm from New Bedford, Massachusetts. It's about an hour outside of Boston. It's a very well-known fishing port. There's a lot of hard-working people that kind of grew up there and stayed there.
Mr. Carrier, what's the highest level of formal education you went to?
So I've attended 2 years of college at Stonehill, right outside of Boston.
What did you do at Stonehill?
Went to class, studied, and I played college basketball.
Why didn't you complete college at Stonehill?
Had an opportunity, one of the summers I was actually doing landscaping work back home, and I've always wanted to be like an entrepreneur. So it was probably one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to do, to stop playing basketball. So I found this building with a friend of mine that was kind of decrepit and falling apart, and we decided we had an opportunity to start a hot dog restaurant. So I sold hot dogs and nachos and chips and hired friends to work for me, and I did that for about 10 years.
Did the restaurant expand?
It did, yeah. We actually, we opened one actually in New Bedford in the fishing port. We had one in Fairhaven, and we actually had another one at a golf course where we managed in the summertime. So it was a really good business.
So, Mr. Carrier, how is it that you left New Bedford and ended up here in Los Angeles?
Yeah. So I had a older cousin that was like a mentor to me. He was involved in the casino business out here. So I've been coming out here with my younger brother since I was like 16 years old. And I always wanted to do something different. I only knew the restaurant space, and living in Massachusetts where like my mom, my dad, all my family resides, and I came to Vegas one Thanksgiving and spent Thanksgiving with my cousin, and next thing I knew, 3 weeks later, I had a plane ticket and I headed out to Las Vegas.
What did you do for work when you got here?
I took care of his 2 kids because I lived with him, with my brother. He was an executive at one of the casinos, and I was trying to make a decision if I wanted to get into food and beverage or not, so I kind of did anything he asked me to do. So we were out working in Laughlin. I was putting on different events for them. I kind of decided what I wanted to do, and I ultimately decided I really didn't want to do food and beverage anymore. I was more interested in technology.
And did you go on to obtain a technology job?
I did, yeah.
With what company?
We were a small company, it was called Infogenesis. They're a point of sale company in town, it's the cash registers in the casinos. So I was able to leverage some of my background I had in food and beverage and start in that space. They wanted someone, I wasn't married at the time, so they wanted someone that could travel and build up the Indian gaming side of the business. Because we did a lot of corporate business here in town, so I traveled all over the US for the past 18 years working for them.
Are you still employed with that same company?
I am, yeah.
What's it called today?
Yeah, we got purchased, we're now called Judicial. We have an office here in town, and been there 18 years.
What's your position or title now?
So now my title is Area Vice President of Indian Casinos and Corporate Gaming.
Mr. Carrier, when did you meet Erica, Mrs. Carrier?
October 9th, 2009. I met Erica at Kona Grill in Summerlin. I was at a car show with some friends, and we wanted to get some sushi and sit on the patio because the Red Sox had a game that night. And made sure my friends found a table next to hers. She was with a family, so I know she didn't have a significant other at the time. And we ultimately struck up a conversation. And I asked her.
When did you two get married?
We got married 2 years later, October 20th, 2011.
You mentioned Hera already, but who are your two children?
So I have a daughter named Hera, who's 8, and I have a little boy, Finn, who's 5.
Mr. Carrier, would you describe your family as being health conscious?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I try to be. I have a autoimmune disorder called celiac arthritis, so I'm trying to be very careful with kind of what I eat, what I consume, and water was one of them for me.
Would you tell the jury how it is that you first came across real water?
Yeah. The Whole Foods in Summerlin. I would go there to get food every once in a while. And then I brought a couple cases home. This is probably back in 2016, 17 timeframe. Brought a couple cases home. I liked the taste of it. I did. It was smooth. My wife liked the taste of it also. And then obviously buying cases all the time, kind of had it up. And then I ultimately signed up for their delivery service of the cases in the 5-gallon jugs.
Once you subscribed to that home delivery service, did your family drink any other type of water?
No. No, once it's on the jugs and you're filling it up in your kids' water bottles and all that, it really became my prime source of water.
And so far as your family's concerned, how are they insofar as who's a water drinker versus maybe who's not so much?
Yeah, I am. I'm a big water drinker. My wife's not. My son Finn was not. He was smaller, right? But my daughter is. That's really the only thing she really drank was water. She's picky with juices and stuff like that, so she consumed the most amount of water with me.
I want you to think back now to November of 2020, okay? In the fall of 2020, how old was Sarah?
Just 5.
Do you recall the initial stages of when she first got sick in November of 2020?
Yes.
What was it like?
So she would have bouts of tummy pain, throwing up at different periods of time leading up to that. And then around November 9th, she was just throwing up a lot that night. She was in a room, and my wife and I took her out of the room, get her on the tile floor, and the way the tile floor was, there was her bedroom, and then her bathroom, and then the tile. So we laid there with puke buckets, and she just wouldn't stop. Fortunately, what do you say to yourself a lot of the time is, I was really concerned about her getting dehydrated because it happened before, and then we had to bring her to the emergency room. So my wife and I just kept giving her more water, and giving her more water, and giving her more water. She ended up stopped throwing up after hours. We ultimately moved her to the living room because, like, anyone gets sick, where do they want to lay on the couch, right? So we could all, Finn was in his crib, and then Erica laid on the couch, and I sat in a chair. And this is where she just laid there for probably 8 hours, but you always think when someone gets sick, their body wants to heal itself, right? So you kind of kick yourself now because you're thinking about, should I have woken her up sooner? But she just wasn't waking up. She was just laying there. We got more concerned as parents at that point in time. I grabbed her, and it was like lifeless. It was like you were grabbing a doll. She just had no, when a kid grabs you, right, and you pick them up, and they hold on to you in a weird way. You feel their muscle. I felt nothing. So I looked at Erica, and I just said, you have to go right now. Like, you have to go to the hospital right this second.
Were you able to go to the hospital with Kara and Eric?
No, we had Finn, and keep in mind, at this period of time, people forget, but this was COVID. This was the heart of COVID. It was like, don't go to the hospital, save those beds for people that had COVID, right? So you had that already ingrained in your mind, so you need to make that decision, like, hey, we need to go right now. I carried her to the car, opened the back seat, Erica sat in the front seat to drive. First the vivid memory I have is when I put her in the car, I put the puke bucket on her tummy. Her head was falling forward. Like her head was coming forward, so I had to take the seat, moving the seat back as much as I could, so we could get her to the hospital. There was a thought of me that was like, should we go together? But I stayed home with Finn, and Erica drove right to someone.
So I'll ask Erica questions about what it was like at Summerlin Hospital. What was it like for you being home with Finn?
For me, I didn't know what was going on. Okay, so you have to understand, Erica's in with Hera, but she's just concerned about Hera, right? Small thing, like, doesn't have a cell phone charger, phone dies, and I'm just at home with Finn. Finn threw up a few times that night with me. He puked, he got better. But I would just get random text messages. I don't know what was going on at all. I would get a text that she's throwing up blood. They've never seen levels this high. Anything you can imagine, right? And then the scariest one that got me was in the middle of the night. I got 911, and it was, I think they're flying us out of here. Either to Colorado or Utah, and ultimately she ended up going to primary in Utah.
Let me show you a document. Shane, could you bring up 674, please? Exhibit 674, it's page 0131. It's already been stipulated ahead of me. So, Mr. Carrier, this is a document that's titled Authorization for Consent to Transfer. You see Harris name at the top left there. And the diagnosis there is liver failure. Do you see that?
Yep.
And the transfer is that what led Erica to text you 911?
Yes.
And did you understand that it was the reason for the transfer was liver failure?
I at the time when I was at home, I think you're only getting text messages like randomly, okay? There's probably only 3 or 4. But once I knew, like, we're getting on a plane to go somewhere at night, we knew it was really bad. At least I did.
Shane, could you zoom in on the medical risks box, please? Mr. Carrier, do you see this portion that Mr. Godfrey's enlarged for us?
Yes.
Medical risks. It's noted here that Hera had a medical risk of worsening or condition or death if you stay here that being Summerlin Hospital. Do you see that?
Yes.
And below, she also had a risk of traffic delay or accident resulting in condition deterioration or death if she were to go. Do you see that?
Yes.
Did you understand when Hera may need a liver transplant, it was a matter of life and death?
Yeah. I don't know much about liver transplants then. I was really scared. I didn't, we're a really close family. I just didn't want to lose it.
So when you learned that Hera needed to get on a plane the life flight into Salt Lake City. What is it that you did at that point?
I had to make arrangements for someone to come to stay with Finn. So I called babysitters and ultimately my cousin's wife came right away. And then I travel a lot, so getting to the airport, being on a flight, I tried to get the first flight that I could to Salt Lake City to be with them.
We'll come back to this later, but was your cousin's wife able to stay with Finn the entire 10 days?
No, so she was able to stay a few days and then we don't like, most of my family's in Boston. I don't really have, like, I have a couple of people here and Erica has a few, but we don't have like parents here that we could. So Erica's sister was up in Washington, so kids weren't in school, so she flew from Portland to Las Vegas with her 2 boys, and then Erica's mom and dad eventually came, and then I was able to be up there in Salt Lake with them, but they were able to take care of Finn.
When you were able to get to Salt Lake, were you able to see her?
No, I landed, we weren't really communicating. All I knew is they landed safely, and Hera was in the ICU at that time. I didn't know much because you're really not communicating, right? Because Erica's in the room with her, right? And Erica didn't want to talk to me because it would scare her, right? So you don't want to scare your child. A 5-year-old remembers a lot. Like, she remembers all this. She remembers a lot more than I was hoping for, but she does remember this stuff. When I got there, I went right, and then I sat in the waiting room for a few hours. And at the time, this is COVID, right? So you can only have one person inside the ICU at a time. Erica came to see me, but Harry didn't want to be alone. That was the hardest moment, was when I saw her in the ICU, right? Everyone's in hazmat suits, and she just didn't, I wasn't sure if she knew who I was when I walked in the room the first time, because she was just wired up with everything possible. Then I thought my job was to, like, I want to be a fun dad, so I was trying to, like, make her alert and do funny things and what do you want and things like that. Whereas I knew mom's the caretaker, right? Ultimately, she wanted mom, and that's okay. So I had limited time when in the ICU, so I did whatever my wife wanted me to do. I was, I got food so she didn't have to leave the room, and went to Target because we only didn't have any clothes. Stuff like that people just don't know or understand. You go to Target and pajamas, shirts, toiletries, toothbrush, anything I could do to help because I didn't know what else to do, right? I slept there the first night in the room until I decided what was next.
At some point during Hera's hospitalization in Salt Lake, do you remember a conversation with the doctors of her ingesting something toxic?
Mm-hmm.
Can you bring up,
Was that a yes?
yes, thank you, Your Honor. Could you bring up 666, please? Or excuse me, 666. And, Shane, if you enlarge the comment section, please, specifically where it starts acute injury secondary to drug toxin. Mr. Carrier, this is a medical record for the liver biopsy that Hera underwent. And do you recall speaking with doctors about potential acute injury secondary to drug toxin?
Yes, I do.
What did that set your mind on? What were you thinking?
What? The first thing that crossed my mind was like, when you have an autoimmune disorder, you take certain medicine for that autoimmune disorder, like did she ingest something of mine? She was at a birthday party a couple days before that was like a little horseback riding thing, and I was like, was there a tranquilizer from this? You're thinking of anything. What's in my house? What food's there? And then I'm also, you're just thinking of anything. It's a scary moment because you're like, what do we do? What? Baby food, kid food, what's in the refrigerator? Anything. Toxins isn't something you come across too often.
So Hera's medical chart reflects that after 10 days, she was able to leave the hospital and return home. Do you recall leaving the hospital and going back to Las Vegas?
I do.
Would you tell the jury about that experience?
I didn't think it was ready for us to go home. I did not, and I still don't, till this day.
What were your concerns?
I was concerned with how Eric, they didn't want us to fly, which I completely understand, right, because the brain. I was just worried about, like, while I'm driving from Salt Lake City back to Las Vegas with my wife in a car. That was scary for me. I'm driving, they also didn't want us there because of COVID was heightened at that time, and they thought we didn't want to get anyone sick. So we got in the car and just, us three drove back to Las Vegas, but at the time I had Finn and Erica's family at the house, and we were nervous about bringing her home and maybe someone's sick and then she gets sick and what do we do? So we checked in a hotel locally, and Erica and I went down off of Koval. We sat in the car, and I went in first and got a COVID test, and then Erica went in and got a COVID test. And we went back to the hotel, and we waited until we didn't have COVID, and then we ultimately went home, and Erica's family left, and we were able to be there with Finn, but.
When that transition happened after you and Erica tested negative for COVID, and you were able to go back home, was Sarah able to see and interact with Erica's family?
My grandmother wanted to give her a hug, you know. Family feels it just like you do as they're home, right? We're trying to update them. They wanted to give her a hug, and you know, they did stuff in the house to make her feel. Something else was super nice at that time. My neighbor who just moved in put lights in our house, like Christmas lights, like it was around Thanksgiving time. I just remembered that right now.
Was Sarah's grandmother able to give her a hug?
No, they had to leave because we were just, you just don't know. We don't really know too much. We know that they say she's okay to go home, but so we go home and we didn't leave. We didn't leave for Thanksgiving. We didn't leave for Christmas. We just basically stayed home.
Now, after you had been advised of liver biopsy results and the toxic substance, did you do anything at your house when you got home?
We just made sure that we got set up with someone in town that we took her to. So our doctor in the country helped us out. It was the doctor up in Utah. Got someone here in town that we were able to at least take her to, which gave us some comfort, right? Locally, just to have somebody. That was a big concern of ours. Because obviously we knew ahead of time, the city can't handle this, right? They sent us somewhere else, and now we're coming back. So that was just a lot of fear that went on during those periods of time.
Did you have any concerns about the food, water, and other, things you consumed that were at your house?
Yeah, it just, we purged our home when we came, right? So throwing everything out of the refrigerator, and we're gonna start fresh with things that, see what happens. The jug that was in the house that we were drinking off of, Erica's nephews also got sick from it and throw it. Erica's brothers.
May I set an objection, Your Honor, may I approach?
Sure. Thank you both.
So, Mr. Carrier, you were saying that people had gotten sick. Was that one of the reasons that you and Erica decided to get rid of all the food and drink in your house?
Yes.
To shift gears a little bit, how's Sarah doing today?
She's a happy kid. She's happy, but she's very scared. And she has anxiety. She does. She likes someone around. She likes her mom in her room with her. It's tough when, so I've been traveling for a long time, right? And I cut back a little bit on that. I'll just give you an example. When Finn gets sick, he gets a fever, he's learned to, I'm fine, I'm good, 'cause he kind of knows already that how Hera gets. So if Finn gets sick in our house, we have to keep Hera away from Finn because we're so fearful of her getting sick. Where when Finn gets a fever, and I was on the road up in California, and she just called me, and I talked to her while I was driving for 2 hours until she fell asleep. Okay, so these are like some of the things that we go through on the regular. It's super heightened. 2 weeks ago, I got sick. I came home from a trip, I got sick, I gave it to my wife, and ultimately we're sitting there just waiting for her to get sick. Finn throws up. Her throwing up is terrible. It's like, last year we went to go visit my parents outside of Boston. She had a throw-up session that lasted hours. But it has a burning sensation now, like in her chest. So that now turned into, that lasted all the way all fall. So from the summit of the fall. So we just don't know what happens on a regular basis. We just don't. So it just causes that pain and anxiety all the time in our life. It just does. And my wife, I try to be the even keel as much as I can, but it's just tough.
You've heard reference throughout the trial thus far about Dr. Guthrie. Do you recall him in Salt Lake?
Yeah. Yes.
Has there been a time where you and Erica had made arrangements for Erica to go back to Salt Lake and see Dr. Guthrie?
Yes.
What led to that?
What we've been dealing with since this happened is just bouts of pain in my chest, pain in my chest. That's the biggest one I always say. I have pain in my chest, it burns. So we're like, you know what, we should go back to who helped us, right? Who's the doctor that helped us ultimately? And we made an appointment, had flights booked, and then she got sick. Again, we couldn't make those flights, so it's just things like that.
And are you and Erica still considering bringing her back to Salt Lake to see him at some point in time?
Yes.
Another doctor that's been mentioned at trial is Dr. Hudson. Dr. Hudson is an expert witness that the plaintiffs have retained. He's a liver specialist. And do you understand that he'll testify that Hera and the other children in this case will likely need monitoring in the future because they likely have scarring on their livers?
Yeah,
What's it been like to hear that?
I think I heard a lot of it Friday. It's scary. It's the unknown. I don't know. Everything that is, you contribute everything that doesn't, everything in your life that doesn't go good, you're always going to contribute to this. That's the hardest part.
Is that future medical monitoring or treatment that Dr. Hudson recommends, is that something that you and Erica intend to do for Hera?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, I have to,
How frequently do you think back to when Hera got sick and went through all this in November 21?
Actually,
Sustain, you could rephrase.
Do you ever think about when Hera got sick in November 2020?
Yeah.
How often?
Well,
Do you ever blame yourself?
I can't yet. I was the one that brought it into the home. Whenever she gets sick, you always kind of blame yourself because we poisoned her that night. Could have grabbed Gatorade, right? Could have grabbed anything else, but you grab the thing that you think is the safest in your home. Yeah, blame myself a lot.
Another expert that will testify later this week is named Dr. Stephen Sands. He's an expert neuropsychologist. Do you recall speaking with Dr. Sands?
Yeah, I do.
And do you recall filling out a survey for him about Hera?
Yes.
What was it like when you met Dr. Sands and spoke with him?
Felt long overdue. People ask like, hey, have you gotten any help? But you don't know until you kind of go through life and you take care of your kids and work and life goes back to normal and then things happen along the way. And you're like, I should talk to somebody, Eric should talk to somebody. And when we did when we met with him together, I felt good afterwards. I did like speaking with him. We've been through a lot of different things. about our life and what we do. And it was comforting.
Do you understand that Dr. Sands is going to recommend, or has recommended, that Hera and the other children in this case get evaluations and different forms of monitoring in the future?
I'm aware of that.
And is that also something that you and Erica intend to do for Hera?
Yeah, 100%.
And something I believe you were just touching on, Mr. Carrier, was that Dr. Sands is also recommending that the parents in this case, people like you and Erica, also need to do something in the future to be evaluated. Is that something you think you should do?
Yeah.
Why?
I have to probably learn to like how to deal with it when it happens, because I know it's gonna keep happening. It's not gonna stop, so. We do. It's heightened. Like, you're scared. I'm scared a lot. I'm scared even today. My cousin's taking the kids and picking up from camp, and I'm like, do you have them? Are they home? I shouldn't live like that, right? So yeah, it's a level of, it's a heightened level. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Carrier.
No, hold on. Eddie Cross.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Carrier. Mr. Carrier, I'm sure with you, as you know, I represent Real Water. Are you ready to proceed, or do you need a minute?
I'm ready to proceed, sir.
Okay, this will not be that long, that's the good news. Mr. Carrier, I want to thank you for sharing what happened to your daughter. I know it's very difficult for you. I have some very few questions for you. Mr. Carrier, are you aware that the total medical bills for Aaron have been about $262,000?
Yes, sir.
That sounds about right to you.
Yes, sir.
And you understand that Real Water is responsible for that, and that's not something the jury's going to see as a verdict, but Real Water is responsible for that. Do you understand that?
I do.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you some questions about, what happened afterwards. I mean, you would agree with me that having a sick child is one of the worst things as a parent in the world, right?
Yes.
And you understand that Real Water caused Harry to get sick, and you've acknowledged that.
Yes.
I'm very sorry about that.
Thank you.
And I'm sorry that I have to ask you these questions, frankly. I know this is difficult.
Again, sir.
I want to ask you, I guess, some happier things. So we understand that Hera was a baseball player or softball at 5. Is she still doing that?
Yes.
And how's she doing?
Good.
Yeah, so still softball or something else?
Softball. She finally picked it up because she couldn't play last fall and she got sick in Boston. So it was nice to see her play this spring.
Great. And does she do any other sports?
Just softball.
Just softball.
That just ended.
How'd she get into softball?
My mom's a great athlete.
No basketball yet?
No basketball yet.
You never know. What other things does Sarah do for fun?
She likes math.
She likes math.
She likes reading. She's a good reader.
She's a good student.
She's a good kid. She's a really good kid. Been through a lot.
Now this, she's what, 8, turning 9 in October?
Yes, sir.
That's wonderful. These events, they happened during COVID, which is about 4 years ago, right? And so far, have you taken her, other than the time that you saw Dr. Sands, have you taken her for counseling?
Yeah, no.
Have you felt like you need to do that for any reason currently?
Yes.
And because of the events of what we're talking about here?
As you get older, you get to learn a little more as time's passed a little bit even for us.
And I'm sorry, I'm really hard of hearing, so if you, any louder you can
Yes.
speak would be wonderful.
Yeah, it's important for all of us. And I think she needs to know also how to deal with it when I'm not here.
And so as part of that, you're gonna make an appointment for her to see somebody in the future?
I'd like to use.
So far, in the last 2 years, you haven't done that?
No.
And for yourself, are you gonna see somebody in the future?
Yes.
Have you done that yet?
No.
What about your wife? Has she seen anybody yet?
No.
One of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is Dr. Guthrie. Sounds like he did a pretty good job.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I would.
And the last time you saw Dr. Guthrie was in 2020 when she got out of the hospital in Salt Lake. And you were gonna see him more recently. Do you remember when that was?
It was like a year ago, but then, as you know, when you change an appointment, it's,
Oh, yeah.
everyone knows how hard that can be. You change an appointment, you gotta wait 6 months.
Okay. So you changed the appointment and you got to fly to Salt Lake, and so now you need to reschedule?
Yes,
Is that something you intend to do?
yes, I'd like to do that.
Who primarily takes care of Hera from a medical perspective today?
We have a doctor that does that, the gastroenterologist that helped her, as well as she has a primary care doctor.
And they test her liver function,
Yes,
and it's been normal?
yes. But it's not easy putting a needle in that child right now.
No, it
So
isn't.
we try to do it if we have to.
And these are part of her normal checkups as a child? What do
Yes.
they call them, wellness visits, something like that?
Yes,
And, she's been doing very well on her wellness visits, would you agree?
on a wellness visit, yes.
Mr. Carrier, again, I'm very sorry that Hera got sick. I want to thank you for testifying. I know this is not easy for anybody, especially for our parents, so thank you.
May I interrupt? Mr. Carrier, so far as Hera's doctor's appointments are concerned, is it your family's habit that you go with her, or does mom do that?
2 kids, right? If not in school, I usually stay home, mom goes. Simba goes too.
Who's Simba?
Simba's is a lion. It's her security blanket. He's still here with us and he stays in the bed. It's a friend of hers from school that, you know, in the hospital, when you can send something to the room, I gave her a lion. So Simba goes, and that's her security blanket when she goes with mom.
So we can ask Erica about those more recent doctor's appointments?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Carrier, again, thank you very much for appearing here today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Any questions from any jurors? No? Okay. Thank you, sir. Watch your head.
Sure.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have a hopefully brief issue to resolve outside your presence. We'll take a hopefully quick 5-10 minute break while Marshall Walker escorts you to the jury room. Don't talk or converse amongst yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with the trial. Do not read, watch, or listen to any report of or commentary on the trial. Do not visit the scene. Don't post anything on social media. Don't Google anything on your phone. Do not form or express opinion on any subject connected with the trial until it is finally submitted to you. See you back in 5 or 10 minutes.
Please rise for the jury, leave your notepads on the